Let's get ready to rumble!
Five Live Boxing.
So I haven't had half an hour with one whirlwind. I've got an hour with another. Evening, Buncey.
Evening, chappers.
I am going to need your calming influence, Mike Costello, as well for the next hour. Evening.
Evening, superstar.
So for the next hour, we're going to focus on Britain's latest boxing world champions and ask who are Scott Quigg, Darren Barker and Jamie McDonald. They've all won titles over the past few months, including Quigg's success on Saturday night. But I suppose is it a problem here, Mike, that they aren't exactly household names?
Yes, and there have been champions down the years that haven't been as well known as others, but we have a particular problem at the moment, and it's partly the failure of promoters and more so the failure of governing bodies, in the sense of governing bodies having so many titles and making it so difficult for people in boxing, let alone the general sporting public, to understand. Just to underline, Darren Barker is comfortably the most well known. He's world champion in historically one of the glamour divisions of the sport. He holds the IBF middleweight title, so he joins the likes of Nigel Benn, Chris Eubank and all the way back to Randy Turpin as British holders of that title. Jamie McDonald won the IBF bantamweight title last May outdoors on a big night at Doncaster Rovers football stadium, and Scott Quigg, as you say, won at the weekend, or he drew in his fight at the weekend. He holds a version of the WBA super bantamweight crown. He's a world champion in status, but he's never won a world title fight, and that sentence alone goes some way to explaining why there's such a difficulty in recognising some of these champions.
Well, also, Steve, one of the other things in that final sentence from Mike is another reason as well, isn't it? He said a version of a governing body's belt, and it goes back to the debate we had in your call 18 months ago, that boxing doesn't help itself sometimes.
No, it doesn't help itself, and I don't want to ever see it go back to where there were just 8 weights and one sort of sanctioning body, which we had in the 50s and the early 60s, Mark. The first sanctioning bodies came around in 61 and 62, and then another one in 88, and then another one in about 90. Now, the reason why they came around, it was to break monopolies that were held. So certain people had power in the 50s, and if you weren't with that group, that cartel of people, you couldn't get your chance. What's happened now, Mark, is it's gone quite absurd. In addition to the 4, we recognise 4 championship, 4 sanctioning bodies. There are about 7 or 8 doing a lot of business. We recognise 4, but what's happened over the last 4 or 5 years is, of those 4, at least 3 of them have splintered their individual weight. So, for instance, the WBA, the World Boxing Association, founded, I think, in 1961, based in Caracas in Venezuela for much of their life. They have a situation at each weight, Mark, where they have a thing called an interim champion. Then they have a regular champion, which is what Scott Quigg is at the moment, and then they have a super champion, and in the case of Scott Quigg's weight, it's a former triple Olympian, I think, called Guillermo Rigondeaux. So they have 3 recognised, in quotes, world champions at that weight. So the guy Nehamo Samano, who owns the interim title from Panama, terrific fighter. Scott Quigg, who was given the regular title and therefore retained it with the draw, terrific fighter. Guillermo Rigondeaux, super fighter. It's extremely difficult, not for the boxing fans, not for the presenters on 5 Live, even guys like you stepping into those giant footsteps as you are. It's near enough impossible for us. If I said to Mike here, Mike, you can't get out of here tonight and have a pint unless you name me 50 of the 90 world champions, he's not going to have a drink tonight. Now, that's ridiculous.
It can work, Mark. You know, if we think back to the 1980s when Sugar Ray Leonard fought Thomas Hearns, and each held rival versions of the world welterweight crown at that time, and there was a great build-up to that fight as their careers ran in parallel as they defended their respective titles. It can work, and it has worked, and as Steve said, we were just about acclimatised and used to 4 world governing bodies, but it's the titles within the world governing bodies that are really creating this mess, and it's in danger of completely undermining every world champion out there. The biggest fight this year so far has just happened in Las Vegas, Floyd Mayweather against Saul Alvarez. In the whole time through the build-up, I didn't hear anybody mention either of the world titles that were at stake. Nobody cares anymore.
Is it harder in this country in particular, Buncey? And bearing in mind what we were saying to Derek Thompson actually about, you know, horse racing and being part of an entertainment industry and selling it to non-hardcore fans, is it harder for non Olympic boxers in this country now to make a name for themselves?
Yeah, it is hard. You need an awful lot of help from your promoter. There's two big promotional groups in this country, and there's two places where you can see them fight, really. One's Box Nation, the exclusive channel, and one's Sky, the traditional channel. Obviously Sky have a lot more viewers. So unless you are on an inside track there, you can be a British champion, you can be a European champion, and as we're going to discuss in the next 50 odd minutes, you can be a world champion and virtually unknown, not just to a wider British public, but in your hometown. Now this was never the case in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s and even 80s, and I'll tell you why it was never the case then, because during those years there was either no sanctioning body or there were only two sanctioning bodies. But more than that, Mark, more than that, we didn't have a situation like we have at the moment where we have upwards of 25 world title fights, 20 world title fights each year involving a British boxer. In the entire 70s I think we had 7 or 8 or 9. In the 60s I think there were 6. In the 80s there might have been 11. Nowadays we can have 4 or 5 a month, or 3 or 4, or maybe even 6 a month. That's quite absurd.
Let's because this is hurting my head at the moment, but it's so complicated. Let's talk about and hear from one of our world champions, shall we, Mike? World IBF middleweight champion Darren Barker, who's had a very difficult journey to the top.
Yes, and he's now the owner of one of the proper belts, as we'd call them. He's world middleweight champion. He has the IBF version. He beat the Aussie Daniel Gill in Atlantic City 2 months ago and overcame adversity in the fight, survived a big knockdown in the 6th round, and that kind of reflects his life story and how he's come back to revive his career. He's from a rich boxing background. His dad, Terry, was ABA national champion back in 1980. His brother, Gary, won a gold medal at the Commonwealth Youth Games in 2004. And Darren himself has a high-class amateur pedigree. He won a gold medal at the Commonwealth Games in Manchester in 2002, all of them boxing in the famous green and yellow colours of the Repton Club in East London. And Darren decided to turn professional in 2004. He won his first 14 fights, and it was at that stage that his career and his life took a tragic turn.
Yeah, in a big way. I boxed on the Friday, and my brother did as well. Gary boxed, I think it was for Repton against Scotland, the club in Scotland, and he come back the next day, and then we had a meal to go to on the Saturday, and my brother died in a car accident. And you know, boxing's such a lonely sport as it is, and if you've got friends that are close to you that do the sport, or you have a family member like I did, they're so important to you, because it, like I say, it's such a lonely sport, and when you've got someone you can confide in and talk to when you're down or you're having a tough time of training, it's a nice outlet to have, because they know what you're going through. So when Gary, you know, died, the thought of trying to carry on boxing without him was just, you know, I couldn't even contemplate it. There was just no way I thought I could do it, and you know, it was a real bad time. Obviously, you know, for me and my family, it was terrible, but I completely went off the rails. And luckily for me, I got some really good people around me, a really solid family, and we managed to pull through it.
I know it's painful for you because I've read your comments and heard you talking about it before, but can you take me through that fateful night? Yeah,
I mean, the whole sort of time's a bit hazy to me, but he come back and we had a meal to go to in Essex, a dinner show that we went to with my family with Gary, and it was crazy. A few of our friends were out in the West End, so I said to Gary, "Look, fancy going up?" Because even though he was younger than me, all our friends were friends with each other. You know, it was a big group of us, and he said, "Yeah, you know, let's go up there." So we got home. We quickly went home, got changed from the dinner show, and shot up the West End. I met our mates, and I never forget this. Like I say, our friends were so close, but for some weird reason that night, me and Gary just branched off the other side of the club and just had a chat and had a drink on our own. It was mad. It was like someone was saying, you know, this is the last time you're going to see him. It was really, really weird. And basically his girlfriend was in uni up in Leicester, so he said to me on the way home, "Look, I'm gonna sort myself out and drive up there." I went, "Look, go, you know, just leave it, go and have a kid, you're shattered, there's no point going like this, it's not going nowhere." And I lived at my nan and granddad at the time, just round the corner, so you know, obviously I couldn't stop him. I'd said my bit, and obviously I've gone home, he's gone and sorted himself out and drove up there, and basically he fell asleep at the wheel on the M1 and crashed and died of the injuries. But I just remember getting woken up by my granddad the next morning saying Gary had an accident, and that was it. I remember thinking, because as a family everything was just so good, we were so lucky, so everything was going our way, and I got to admit, when my granddad woke me up that morning, I just assumed everything would be okay. My family are worriers anyway. And it wasn't till I got in the car, drove up to the M1, and when I got to the M1, it was standstill. There's people standing outside their cars, scratching their head, what's going on. Then I knew it was serious, and got to the hospital, told them who we were, and they took us into a room where my mum and dad was, and my dad sort of said, no, he's gone, and that was it. Life changed forever.
Without that crutch to lean on that you spoke about, you could speak about things with Gary that you couldn't with anybody else.
Yeah.
Did you then, in your mind, retire from boxing?
100%. I didn't care about anything. All I wanted to do was go to the pub, and drink. That's all I wanted to do, just switch off and numb the pain. And literally that's all I did do for a long time. And boxing didn't even enter my thoughts at all. It's not like I'd even made a decision to retire. It was like I didn't even think about what I was going to do the next day. It was just I want to go to the pub, I want to drink, I just want to do something mental. And I remember going to Las Vegas, funny enough, with my other brother and my friend. I had a Mercedes I bought out of what I'd earned out of boxing at the time, and I sold it to one of them, will you buy any car or something, just to quickly get the money. And I think I got about $6,000 for it, and I remember I spent every single penny in about 2 weeks, just went absolutely mad. I was just living every day as it can. It was a mad one, but I suppose I was being a bit selfish in that sense, because the rest of the family were hurting, and I was just worried about myself. And luckily, we I managed to sort myself out, and with the support of the family, we all sort of helped each other out, and here I am now.
And you did. You went on to win British, Commonwealth and European titles, but then in the middle of 2010, your life was derailed again.
Yeah, there was a number of things really. I had injuries to my hips. I got bashed up in Watford High Street trying to look after this geezer. I don't know why I got involved, to be honest with you, but yeah, it just seemed like one thing after another, and you could start, scratch your head thinking, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Is someone trying to tell me something like, look, knock this on the head? And I don't know, it was tough, but I'd always set out as a kid, my ultimate goal was to win a world title, and then when Gary died, it was like, look, anything I achieved in boxing was dedicated to Gary, because he was the real naturally talented one out of the two of us, and there's no doubt in my mind, and I'm not just saying this because he's my brother, he would have gone on to have won a world title or been really successful. So that's my main objective now, is everything I do I dedicate to my brother, and then that gave me the most satisfaction. Winning that world title was being able to dedicate it to my brother. Not even winning it doesn't compare, even though they tie in. Just being able to dedicate it to my brother means the absolute world to me,
And we could see what it meant when you were rolling around the ring when the split decision was announced, because it was a very close fight, but you get the verdict and then everything broke loose.
Yeah, because everything flashes back, what I'd been through, from a kid to Gary dying to the injuries, to the beating up, everything, and there were so many times I thought, is this going to actually happen? And just for it all to come true, it was mad. And like I say, I just wanted to dedicate it, and I was able to do that, and it was like putting something to bed, if you like. It was just a really, really emotional time, and even now, it gives me goosebumps, and it makes me smile, because I'm so glad I've been able to do it.
You were nearly put to bed yourself in the 6th round, and you said then that you actually saw Gary in the ring.
Yeah, 100%, and I don't, a lot of people think I'm doing this for a story or a talking point or anything like that. When I was down for that 9 seconds, it seemed like about 10 minutes. I'm telling you, it was a mad 9 seconds. The things that were flashing in my thoughts, and one of them, the most powerful one, was my brother. It was as if he was saying, look, come on, get up, come on, you're not beating here. And I suppose every man has this instinct, but when you're hurt like that, you want to give up, you want to give in, and there was something there stopping me from doing that. And whether it was my brother, I had visions of my daughter, you know, it was mad. It was the maddest 9 seconds of my life, I'll tell you that.
And it is incredible where boxers go, 9 seconds, and yet all those thoughts that you've just taken a minute to articulate, but they all flash through your mind while you're on the canvas.
Yeah, and that's you know, the God's honest truth. I look back at that 9 seconds now, and you know, you hear the story all the time when people are near-death experiences and the life flashed in front of them. It was almost like that. That 9 seconds seemed like 10 minutes. It was unbelievable, and I don't know how I got up, who got me out, but I'm glad they did.
It was the second time you challenged for a world title. You were beaten by Sergio Martinez, who is still ranked one of the best pound-for-pounders in the world in 2011. And you've said since that at that time you hated boxing.
Yeah, I did. I had a real love-hate relationship with it. You know, sometimes I'd be really, really in love with the sport and everything's buzzing, and on the flip side I'd be absolutely, you know, really, really, I'd resent it. I'd hate the sport, you know, to the point where I needed 2 hip operations, you know, like 28 years old, you know, driving me absolutely mad. It's difficult to sort of explain it, to be honest with you, but at that time when I fought Martinez, I was in a bad place. I'm not saying that if I was in a good place and I loved the sport, it would have made any difference to the outcome, but I just wasn't. When I compare the fight with Martinez to when I fought Gil, it's just totally different, and you know, that was another story I can look back at, and they're all experiences, and I'm glad I got through it.
I've been involved in boxing in various guises, Darren, for a long, long time, and I've never known the outpouring of goodwill and congratulations for a world champion in this country. It was just astonishing.
I remember being in Jersey City before the fight, the week of the fight, and I come out of the room where I was because my other brother was with me. He was the chef doing all the meals, and he goes, "You all right?" Because I had a tear in my eye, all my eyes all red. He goes, "You all right?" Yeah. He goes, "What's up?" I mean, to be honest, mate, I've just been reading the Twitter, and like you said, the outpour of support was unbelievable. You know, for one person to say that they've never wanted a British fighter and they've never wanted anyone to do so well or win a world title as much as they've wanted me, for one person to say that is flattering. But to get near on thousands of people saying it, you know, it's overwhelming. And it touched me. It really did touch me. So when I was, walking to that ring, in the ring, it felt like I had the whole nation behind me. You hear it with football all the time, you know, like the 12th man. It was like, you know, I suppose in boxing, like having the second man in there with me, and I'm honoured, and I thank everyone so much for their support. It made a real difference.
And next up on December the 7th, you go to Germany and defend against Felix Sturm. But this week is the 20th anniversary of the rematch between Nigel Benn and Chris Eubank, and fight fans in this country, and I'm right there among them, want to see now you against Matthew Macklin, you against Martin Murray, and maybe try to recreate that great series of fights from 20 years ago and beyond.
And I want to do it, and I know they want to do it. Obviously, with the Stern fight, he's a mandatory. I have to face him or I get stripped. As far as going Germany is concerned, and you know, whether the fight was in London, Germany or Timbuktu, you know, I'm so confident I can beat Stern. And the deal was that great that I just couldn't turn it down. At the end of the day, people say, "Well, you're going to Germany for your champion." One, I believe I want to beat him. Two, the deal's so great. And three, in the day, I've got a young family. You know, I've got to put food on the table, and it was that great that I could never turn it down. I mean, the money I'm getting is life-changing. I'm not a sellout, and I'm not doing it for the money, but at the end of the day, it's my job. And like I say, I'm not going there, and I will not get beat, and I will win. And then when I do come back to England, then we can talk about these potential fights. Because, like you say, I would love to rekindle that era with Ben Eubank, Collins, Watson. You know, it was unbelievable. I remember growing up watching that, and I would love to be part of them sort of fights. And I'm sure, I'm positive they will happen. But like I say, I need to get Stone out of the way first.
It's the world IBF middleweight champion Darren Barker speaking to Mike Costello. Mike and Steve Bunce with me on 5 Live Boxing until 10:30. He is one determined individual, isn't he, Mike?
Yes, he is. And, you know, there are many stories like that in boxing, and Darren was able, in the end, to steer his own path. But, you know, there were some bumps in the road along the way. And it was interesting, what I was saying there in the interview to him, it was genuine, that I have never known so much outpouring of salutes for a world champion in this country. And so for all we've been talking about tonight, that that Darren Barker might be the most well known of the three world champions, Britain's newest world champions we've mentioned tonight, but he still doesn't have that crossover appeal. But with, the more and more people that get to hear this story and realise where he's come from to get where he is now, then I think his popularity is going to grow and grow.
But then someone like Carl Froch, for example, Bunce, took a lot of time to cement his place in the public's consciousness, didn't he? So will this be similar for Barker?
Yeah, I think it'll be similar in the sense that Darren's won the world title and he's not instantly being, greeted at the airport. Carl Froch, and no one knows why. Carl's an enigma. He's genuinely an enigma. No one can quite work out why Carl Froch, after all these 8 or 9 fantastic fights, isn't a superstar. Some people say it's because Carl's too arrogant. Some people say it's because he's had too many fights on the road. Some people say it's because he didn't fight on Sky sooner. Well, that's rubbish, because when he won his world title, about 4 million people watched him live on ITV. No one knows exactly why Carl hasn't crossed over. He's done one of those dancing shows I think on ITV, and he's getting that recognition now. But Mark, he was a world champion in 2009. I think he won the title, maybe even 2008. And it was a brilliant fight against an unbeaten Canadian on the night. Since then, he's been involved in not just a series of good fighters, arguably the greatest series of back-to-back world title fights, not just by a British boxer, but by any boxer. There was no bums. There was one easy defence in whatever it is, 9 or 10. He has absolutely pushed the barriers, Carl, and for some reason hasn't quite made it. And perhaps the reason he hasn't quite made it, and Mike touched on it a little bit there, and Darren's touched on it, is he hasn't had that natural British challenger. He hasn't had that big, sexy British challenger that we can build up. Part of the Ben and Eubank stuff, and I was at the Theatre of Dreams 20 years ago with 42,000 people, Mark, and I was at I was in Birmingham a few months earlier when they fought, a couple of years earlier when they fought, and I was all of those fights involving that group of Brits that Mike mentioned there and that Darren mentioned, and they had that great competition with each other, and that's unfortunately what perhaps Carl missed, and that's what Darren's got the opportunity. Once he gets Stern out of the way, once he fills his back pocket with the money, he's got the opportunity to fight Matt Macklin, who can sell a fight and fight, to fight Martin Murray, who can sell a fight and fight. And if those guys get involved in some kind of round robin, in 18 months' time, Darren Barker will not be on the same show as this discussing why he's an under-the-radar world champion.
No, because we've spoken a lot in the past, haven't we, Mike, about the need for domestic rivalries, and from what Bunce was saying now and from what you were saying to Darren, the middleweight division could very much provide this.
Yes, and all three of them have shown that they've got the championship mentality and they've got the ability to cope at that level. Both Martin Murray and Matthew Macklin, that Steve mentioned there, have fought for world titles and gone really well against very established opposition. And you can imagine a round robin taking place over 2 and even 3 years between the three of them, winning and losing against the different opponents, as happened with the likes of Collins and Watson and Ben and Eubank. And so over time you start to get a narrative, you get to know more and more about their personalities and their profiles, and the fights are almost guaranteed to be good fights, if not great fights, and that's in the end what draws an audience to these boxers. For far too long, promoters and television companies have been obsessed with unbeaten records. Finally, that defence, that brick wall is being broken down, and we're seeing more and more fights now between boxers who are putting more and more on the line. And I think if Barker and Macklin and Murray can get together over, as I say, the course of 2, maybe 3 years with matches and rematches, and then you've got all these form lines to mix and marry and to debate, that could really be something really special that can take us back to something like 20 years ago. It's never going to be the same again because we don't have the presence on terrestrial television. But Ricky Hatton has shown, David Hay has shown that if you get the right two names in the ring, boxers in this country still can become massive sports stars.
And because of the fact that we've talked narrative, we've talked determination, we've talked profile, we might not necessarily have discussed his actual talent. Which is kind of important.
Yeah, well, Darren Barker's pedigree, as Mike touched on there, he won the Commonwealth Games in 2002, and he went through, he had that bit of a blip when his brother died, then he had another blip when he was assaulted, he was boozing a little bit, got himself back on track, won all of the domestic stuff. Sadly, a couple of European title fights with Matt Macklin fell through. Once I think Darren was injured, once I think Matt was injured. No suggestion they didn't want to fight each other. And as we've got to this stage, and you see see Darren in his losing fight against Sergio Martinez, and you see him in his winning fight against Daniel Gill. What he is, Mike, and I don't like to use this expression, even though I'm an old fat geezer. I don't like to use old school, but he is old school. If I pick Darren Barker up, I can drop him on a parachute into the 50s, into the 60s, into the 70s. I'm not saying he's going to beat Terry Downs, our great 50s and 60s middleweight. I'm not saying he's going to beat Alan Minter, our great 70s middleweight. But you know what? After 15 rounds, there'd be blood, guts and glory, and the judges would be hard to separate them. He's that good. He's old school.